Alright, hey, what's going on, guys? Welcome back to another FNAF stream. And of course, since it is Halloween and everything, well, it's the last bit of Halloween and everything. Happy Halloween, everyone. And of course, what better way to celebrate the Spooktober Halloween season than a FNAF video? As always, you know how the story goes. We watch FNAF theories, sit back, relax, and we give our own thoughts on what the FNAF lore is all about and everything. I share my thoughts and opinions of stuff I agree with and stuff I disagree with. And because it's FNAF and everything, and because we are about to enter the month of November, you know what that means. The FNAF 2 movie is coming out on December 5th of 2025. So we are about a month away from the sequel of the most popular, most beloved indie video game horror movie adaptation to have ever been created and made $600 million in the box office last year. Obviously, I can't wait for that. Obviously, I will probably be doing the same thing of what we did last time for the first movie, where I probably do like a review within an hour of seeing the movie, just so it's fresh in my mind, and then wait a couple days and then give my own full-on, in-depth spoiler breakdown, because I feel like I have a lot to say and everything. Just so I have two different reviews and everything, because I imagine I'm obviously going to see it as early as possible because, well, I've been connected to the FNAF universe since it came out in 2014, so I can't wait for it. I can't wait to see what the FNAF 2 movie is all about and everything. And I'm very curious to see stuff that they fix, and hopefully my complaints from the first movie are fixed in this movie. Mainly, I want to see the killer animatronics actually be killer. But as far as the whole thing about, is it going to be the same thing as last year where they're releasing the movie on theaters, but also on streaming services on Peacock on the same day? Unfortunately, I do not know that information, and I don't know when we'll get the information. I'm honestly surprised we don't know at this point, because I want to say in the first movie, we knew by the time the first trailer came out, maybe May or June, we knew that they're releasing on the same day as Peacock. But here it is, October 31st on Halloween, about to be November, a month away from the movie coming out, and we don't know anything about the streaming service. I would imagine maybe they do streaming service because, once again, the first movie was so successful. So I'd imagine it makes sense for them to do that. But at this present moment, I have no idea. But to me, in my own personal case, it doesn't matter whether it's on streaming service or movie theaters, because I like going to the movie theaters outright. And for something like FNAF, where I care a lot about, I'm going to see in the theaters regardless of what happens. If it's 50 miles away, I still will drive 50 miles away, as opposed to sitting in my own couch living room right here and watch a FNAF movie on the comfort of my own home. Because I want to see it in the theater, because I feel like that's how FNAF is meant to be seen. But anyways, let's get into the FNAF theory, talking all about Glamrock Freddy being Michael Afton from Security Breach. Here we go.
It's been almost 4 years since Security Breach came out, and we were introduced to everyone's favorite animatronic dad, Glamrock Freddy. While at first he seemed just like an unusually friendly animatronic, it didn't take long for his behavior to become suspicious, leading to Game Theory's first theory on Security Breach post-release, including the idea that Glamrock Freddy's heightened awareness and weird statements indicated that he was actually possessed, specifically by the main player character of most of the first 6 games, Michael Afton. However, while that idea was somewhat well accepted at the time, as time's gone on and new games and information from behind the scenes have come out that seem to shift the story focus from the Afton family to the Mimic, the idea that Glamrock Freddy is possessed at all has been called into question, with other ideas such as him just being a sentient AI or the Mimic's influence being behind his odd behavior instead. So since it seems like a new game in the Security Breach era is being teased by longtime FNAF composer Leon Riskin, and it's been a long time since the original theory of Glamrock Freddy's possession came out, I figured it was about time to go back to the topic and see just how well the evidence holds up, not only for Game Theory's original theory, but also for the other explanations for Glamrock Glamrock Freddy that have been circulating in the community. And I think there are a few things that have either been forgotten or overlooked in the years since the game originally came out. So stay tuned and consider subscribing, because I'm going to explain just what evidence there is for what's up with Freddy and what I think could be going on with who he really is. But first, do you like cool pins? Because the ID's Fantasy limited edition enamel pin set has only a few days left series we have today. Security Breach starts off at Freddy Fazbear's Mega Pizzaplex, with the animatronics performing. However, partway through the show, Freddy starts to glitch out on stage after seeing something his systems label a high-level threat, with said threat seemingly being a person. Eventually, Freddy boots up in his room in safe mode and discovers that, while he was out, a boy named Gregory, who isn't a registered guest at the Pizzaplex, crawled into his stomach
Named Gregory.
catch and is hiding from Vanessa, the security guard. Freddy agrees to protect him and help him get out of the Pizzaplex after the doors close before he can make it out of the building, and the rest of the game is
And, I guess backstory for, those who don't remember, Freddy falling apart on stage and being booed into safe mode was such an important detail, and honestly, it's what caused the whole Security Breach game to exist. Now, whether that was the original plan, for better or for worse, that's a conversation for a different day. But what I mean is, Monty, Chica, and Rotzi, the stat bots, the Nightmare-owned stat bots, Vanny, they're all tied to the VR, AR, mimic AI that we see in Ruin. But Freddy, being booted in safe mode, they are not corrupted by the mimic AI glitch trap virus, so that's why he doesn't attack us. That's why he's not a threat. That's why he's being friendly. It's because he's booted in safe mode.
largely focused on Gregory exploring the Pizzaplex and upgrading Freddy with parts from the various Glamrock animatronics. Meanwhile, the character Vanny, who either is Vanessa or is at least connected to her depending on the train of theories you want to go down, and the animatronics are hunting down Gregory due to the influence of the glitch trap virus. Additionally, Freddy being in safe mode seems to protect him from the worst effects of the glitch trap virus, though after Vanessa gets her hands on him in the maintenance area, he will become aggressive when he ends up in low power mode. If/when Gregory makes it through the night, there are 6 possible endings. There are a couple basic ones, such as where Gregory just leaves and gets tracked down by Vanny, and one where he and Freddy steal a car and Gregory uses the car battery to keep Freddy functional after he runs out of power. There's also an ending where they take the fire escape that's locked behind VIP access for probably illegal reasons. Freddy sets the Pizzaplex on fire and knocks Vanny off the roof, only for Vanessa to show up totally fine on the roof.
It's illegal reasons because it's an emergency fire escape exit, but it's only allowed to be entered if you are VIP access. So if you're not VIP, well, I guess you're being burned down the building, and obviously this is a series where you have FNAF 3, you have FNAF 6, you have Security Breach, you have this, but also the Burn Trap ending. A lot of games involve fire, but as we said numerous times, fire, burn down buildings, burn down animatronics to rest their souls. It doesn't work. So stop trying fire.
Roof afterwards, as well as an ending where Vanny and Freddy both get disassembled by the staff bots. Additionally, there are 2 other endings that are somewhat debatable in terms of which one is the true ending, though one is more widely accepted than the other. However, both are important, at least from a perspective of understanding the world. The Princess Quest ending is achieved when Gregory beats all 3 Princess Quest games in the building, which are directly tied to Glitch Trap. Beating the 3rd game gets rid of Glitch Trap's influence from the Pizzaplex and allows Gregory, Freddy's head, and Vanessa to all leave the Pizzaplex and chill on a hill eating ice cream together. The other ending is the Burn Trap ending, where after fully upgrading Freddy, Gregory and Freddy head into the sinkhole under the Pizzaplex to discover that it was built on top of the Freddy's location from Freddy Fazbear's Pizzeria Simulator, which is surprisingly intact after it was set on fire with the animatronics that were lured there and the player character who was probably Michael inside by William's former business partner Henry, as well as having the Pizzaplex built on top of it.
If Henry built it, because now with the presentation of Seek of the Mimic, a lot of things that we had previously assumed to have been made by Afton or Henry, Edwin from Seek of the Mimic now shows, oh, the spring lock suits were actually made by Edwin instead. So it comes to the question, it's like, did Henry even make FNAF 6? Because, I mean, Edwin also has a lot of, negative animosity towards Afton, so it would also make sense for him to build in a bunker to lure everyone back, including William Afton, and burn them all down as revenge to prove that Dad was right and do not trust the Aftons.
Inside the building, there's a massive hole in the middle of the pizzeria floor, which Gregory can only go down in Freddy if he doesn't want to get attacked by the local pile of robot spaghetti. And as the two descend, Freddy has a whole monologue about having been there before, finding himself when he was forced to clear the path, now having a choice where he didn't before, and how despite his friends being present, angry, and confused, he would protect Gregory, before finally ending off by saying, "I am not me." Then the floor falls out from under them, and we're treated to a cutscene of an extra crispy spring Bonnie-suited corpse man with purple eyes emerging from a charging pod, who then proceeds to hack Freddy and send the Glamrocks to attack Gregory. After successfully setting Burntrap on fire a few times, the building starts to collapse, Gregory and Freddy escape, and Burntrap gets grabbed by the animatronic blob. But while that's the story, there's one major thing that needs to be addressed before talking about its usage in theorizing. Namely, the most recent interview with Scott Cawthon released on Daco's YouTube channel for FNAF's 10th anniversary.
Before we dive into that, first of all, chat, what do you think is the canon ending? Is it the Burntrap blob ending where you take all the parts into Freddy and you burn Burntrap down and you escape? Or is it Princess Quest? What do you think is the canon ending? Because to me, it's a lot like the death order of the series of what is the first death in the series. It doesn't fit cleanly. No matter what you say, no matter what ending you say is canon, or same thing, no matter what kid you say died first, it doesn't fit cleanly. You have to overlook some inconsistencies. Like, in the death order, Susie, Chica, you have to overlook their death lines in Ultimate Custom Night saying, "Oh, I was the first, I'm the one who's seen everything." For something like Charlie Charlotte, who was killed outside the pizzeria, which is the only time a child was killed outside the pizzeria, indicating that may have been William Afton's first victim. But also, even further, in the insanity speech in FNAF 6, we assume it to be Henry because it says HRY223 in the audio tape. He says, "Oh, a wound first inflicted on me that I let spread to others." The wound being his daughter dying to his former business partner, William Afton, let spread to others, aka other kids died with, like, Susie and the other missing children's incident, Cassidy, where William Afton went too far, his own daughter Elizabeth, Michael Afton, right? The list goes on and on. A wound first inflicted on me that I let spread to others. Right? But then it's like Elizabeth Afton also has a case of being first and everything, but then not really, because we know Elizabeth Afton has to die before the FNAF 4 Cron Child, because then that leads to the FNAF 4 Cron Child of, "Oh, what did you see? You know what will happen if he catches you, the Springlock suit," and that's why he's afraid of the animatronics. And that would explain why there's the stomach mouth of Fredbear, because Elizabeth Afton died by being lured from ice cream from Baby, and when they got close enough, their stomach opened up with a claw grip, grabbed Elizabeth Afton, his sister, and killed her. That would make sense why the FNAF 4 Cron Child is scared of the Springlock suits and sees a stomach mouth on the animatronic, because that's how a child would interpret the incident, because quite literally, their mouth opened up on their stomach and killed their sister. But it doesn't fit cleanly. No matter what person you say died first, you have to overlook some other details. Very same thing here. What ending of Security Breach? And this is something that's been controversial ever since the game came out. Everyone thought the canon ending Security Breach was the Burntrap ending because it was one of the endings that was animated. So it has to be canon. It involves William Afton, so if it involves William Afton, the main villain, that also means it must be canon. But then you have Princess Quest, the only 3-star ending in the series. And Princess Quest, as a reminder of how it works, is there's now been 4 Princess Quest arcade games in this series. And how they work is, in order to play the Princess Quest games, you have to beat the preceding one first before you can continue on. You can't play Princess Quest 2 before you beat 1. You can't play 3 until you beat 2. You beat 3 at the end of Security Breach. That's how you get the Princess Quest ending in Security Breach. And then when you get to FNAF VR Help Wanted 2, you play Princess Quest 4. The only way you get to Princess Quest 4 is if 3 is beaten, meaning the Princess Quest ending in Security Breach. But once again, let me know your thoughts on what you think. Is it Princess Quest or is the Bear Trap ending? Because the issue is the Princess Quest ending, it explains why Freddy's head is headless in Ruin, because Freddy's head is put in Gregory's bag in Princess Quest in the ending. Vanny obviously also drops, or Vanessa, drops the bunny rabbit Vanny mask in Phaser Blast as well. That would explain why at the beginning of Ruin, why the Vanny mask is picked up and retrieved and given to Cassie at the beginning of the game and everything. Why Freddy's is headless in Ruin. It explains all that. But then, how does the pizzeria become a wreck? They say it was an earthquake, but to me, that is complete jabberish. Very similar of how Circus Baby's Pizza World was closed due to a gas leak. When in actuality, it was closed because, well, Elizabeth Afton was killed by one of your animatronics on site.
In the interview, Scott explained that originally he hadn't told Security Breach's developer, Steelwolf Studios, what the actual story was, and assumed that he could get by just giving them pieces to the puzzle, and certain things to include, only for Steelwolf to take those pieces and try to make a story out of it themselves. For example, while he said he wanted to be careful about saying things to not mess with the lore, he mentioned that Burn Trap wasn't originally supposed to move, instead being the sort of thing you would see peeking around the corners propped up against a wall or between things like an old decaying movie prop with an unclear purpose. Meanwhile,
The interesting thing about, hindsight's 2020, hearing Scott talk about, what was supposed to happen in Security Breach, what the story was supposed to be. Yes, it's interesting information, and, you're going to hear it from the creator's mouth. And obviously, I'm not saying what Scott says is wrong or invalid or, you don't take his word at face value. You do. He is the creator. He is the person. Why we talk about FNAF so much is because of that man right there. That's not what I'm saying. But what I'm saying is, Security Breach had such a troubled development. It was supposed to come out in 2020, but then the pandemic happened, so obviously it got delayed. And then it was delayed to early 2021. And then it got delayed again because Scott and Steelwolf had issues with the story of what to put in and everything like that. And Steelwolf felt like this was way too big of a plan, so they had to condense a little bit like that. So that's why they had to delay it to late 2021. And it turned out it was very, very late 2021, where it was December of 2021, and the game came out, and it was a buggy, glitchy mess, and it was not ready to be released. It needed more delays. It needed more polish. But the issue is, it had been delayed at that point like 3 or 4 times, and each time you delay something, this goes for movies, games, shows, music, books, anything, any project. Anytime you delay and push a release date, it costs more and more and more money. They've had 3 or 4 delays each time. Each time costs them more and more money, and people are getting more fed up. It's like, hey, when is this game gonna come out? You've delayed it 3, 4 times. Just release it at this point. Well, they did, and look at the product we got. And I say all that because it also adds context with the books. Because at the time, Security Breach was supposed to come out in 2020, and then the books that came out throughout the year of 2020, and then throughout the year in 2021, instead of what was supposed to happen, where it was supposed to fill in the gaps and add context for Security Breach, the game that we had already played and saw in its full value, instead, the books are still coming out because they still have to adhere to their own release date and their own schedule. these books are coming out in 2020 and 2021 and adding context and filling these gaps, filling these holes for Security Breach, a game we haven't even played yet, so we have no idea what's going on. You're filling in these holes for something that doesn't even release yet, right? Because very similarly, like one of the things that people thought that was supposed to happen in Security Breach was baby Elizabeth Afton was supposed to be the new villain in the series. It was supposed to be revealed, at least from the books, that Elizabeth Afton was a lot more threatening and a lot stronger of a threat than William Afton. It was so much so that in the books, it pretty much said that William Afton is only alive because Elizabeth Afton, baby, is around. But once baby left the premises, left the room, William Afton just perished like a vampire who was able to see the sunrise for the first time. That's what happened. Very clearly, get off the interpretation that Elizabeth Afton is the only reason keeping William Afton alive, meaning she is a stronger threat. Obviously, that did not happen at all in the series, but that was something that was released in the books, and maybe that was supposed to add context in the game that we were supposed to get, but obviously, that did not happen because of the delays.
Burn trap we actually got in the game was very mobile, with a whole cutscene of him emerging from his charging pod in a cloud of purple smoke. So, since there were miscommunications about the intended story and a lot of dissatisfaction from multiple parties with how the game turned out, Scott ended up working more closely with Steel Wool with the intention of making things right by the fanbase, and made the Ruin DLC to redeem the game. After the interview was released, a lot of fans interpreted Scott's statements to mean that main game Security Breach is an unreliable source of information and was partially retconned through the Ruin DLC being the actual story Scott meant to tell the whole time. And as such, everything in Security Breach that isn't directly shown to have happened in either Ruin or Help Wanted 2 isn't canon, or at least shouldn't be given much weight when considering the overall story. The Burn Trap ending? Irrelevant. Any connections to past games and characters? Steel Wool's fault and no longer canon. Ghosts in general? Potentially not even relevant to the current story arc at all because Ruin's main villain is the Mimic, an endoskeleton that could be haunted by emotion, but is aggressive due to behaviors it copied rather than possession by a spirit. The thing is, I think all of these takeaways miss one crucial detail from the interview. Namely, Scott seems to still consider what we got in Security Breach to be the actual lore. He said he was hesitant to give an example of miscommunication between him and Steel Wool because he didn't want to mess with that lore, but thought it might be okay for Burn Trap. He then refused to explain what Burn Trap's original purpose was, and referred to it in the past tense, likely because that—
Obviously, this video is about Glamrock Freddy, but if I had to guess, just reading Scott's mind for a second, the detail that he's intentionally keeping vague and doesn't want to talk about is Gregory being human and is he patient 40 cents. To me, that's what he's intentionally keeping vague. Is Gregory a robot? Is he patient 40 cents? Because that was another thing that, you mentioned Gregory being a robot or patient 40 cents when Security Breach came out in 2021. Oh boy, you were dealing with the pitchforks. MapOut was getting death threats because of that.
That purpose has changed to account for what we got in Security Breach. Not to mention the idea that the entirety of Security Breach managed to get past Scott without him seeing or altering any of it himself doesn't make any sense. There may be things he wasn't able to change if he didn't want to have to delay the game again, but I find it highly unlikely that somehow Steel Wool managed to show Burn Trap's hands in one of the early trailers for the game, and Scott didn't correct them on the design if, for example, Burn Trap was originally intended to be a strangely immobile mimic. In fact, I wouldn't be surprised if the reason Burn Trap seems to come out of nowhere at the end of the game with very little build-up is because Scott told Steel Wool to not include him anywhere except for briefly in the pizzeria at the end of the game. However, by the time the game was due to release, that brief inclusion at the end of the game ended up as the Burn Trap boss fight. And unless Scott wanted to delay the game again, they had to put out the game in the state that it was. Either way though, I think it's much more likely that Ruin was only a course correction in the sense that it got the story into a comprehensible position and set things up for future games. If Ruin's existence retconned or decanonized any of Security Breach, I feel like Scott would have said so the same way he decanonized the version of Doug in the FNAF movie book that was a creep, and said that if the one retcon he'd made before Pizzeria Simulator had caused issues, he would have made a statement addressing it. Meanwhile, in the statements we actually did get from the interview, he specifically implied that the lore we got is the actual lore and the original plan is something that is past tense. He did say that Ruin put them in a position where things could be continued easily, but I think it's hasty to assume that the story and themes he referred to exclude the main game that Ruin is a direct continuation of, especially when Ruin includes things like the Blob, despite it only appearing in an ending that most fans consider to not be the one that actually happened. I personally think the Blob being there indicates that Scott and Steelwool were trying to say that stuff from the main game was going to be addressed more directly whenever the Blob ends up showing up again, even if not in Ruin or the couple games that came after. Either way though, at any time Scott could have told us that things should be ignored, or that because an ending didn't happen, its information isn't relevant the same way that, say, Pizzeria Simulator's non-canon endings are. But he didn't. He referred to his original plans in the past tense, and referred to the events of Security Breach as lore that he didn't want to mess with. Because of this, I feel like Scott still considers Security Breach to be important from a lore perspective, and that it's still incredibly important to consider all the information in main game Security Breach when theorizing about things like Glamrock Freddy's identity, even if the two most recent games don't touch on it too directly. As such, I'm going to be treating everything in main game Security Breach as either what did canonically happen, or what could have canonically happened if the actions for different endings were taken, and refer to the additional context we get from the content we got after game's release as the video goes on, just like I would with any other game in the franchise. That being said though, base game Security Breach and its story is what MatPat was working with in his first theory on the game, and from just that game it's pretty easy to see where he was coming from with the idea of Mike Afton possessing Freddy. While some of the points he made in that video, such as the idea of the FNAF 4 bullies being in the Blob and being the friends Freddy was referring to in his monologue, are definitely weaker and have more straightforward explanations, there are a lot of
Weaker, yes and no. It's one of those things where it's like, you know, maybe like that take Age Like Milk, where it's like, oh yeah, the Glamrock Chica, their soul, their spirit was possessed by the kid wearing the Chica mask from the FNAF 4 minigame. Yeah, I can see why the Age Like Milk, but at the same time though, you know, with Bonnie Bro from FNAF VR Help 1 and 2, we believe Oswald's dad is connected to the Freddy mask. We are getting backstory from those characters, so I mean, he wasn't a ballpark all those years ago. Just saying.
Of things that line up for both Freddy being possessed and the idea that the spirit possessing him was Michael. After all, he does have that whole I am not me speech about finding himself while clearing the path in the Pizzeria Simulator location, and how now he has a choice where he didn't before. It would make a whole lot of sense for him to be saying he's not just Glamrock Freddy, and for him finding himself and gaining agency being finding the remains or getting haunted by a spirit present at that location, who now needs to be factored into his identity and made it possible for him to break free from the limitations of his programming. And if that is the case, there are only so many candidates for who he could be possessed by who are in the location and don't fit other characters better. If William's anyone, he would make the most sense to be connected to the character that looks like Crispy Springtrap. The pile of robot spaghetti that is Molten Freddy would make the most sense to be in the bigger pile of robot spaghetti that is the Blob. The puppet's mask is in the Blob, while the puppet spirit's name, Charlie, is in the file name for the post-it room door, and Elizabeth doesn't correlate with Freddy, but somewhat does with Vanessa, who has the same eye color, essentially considers Glitchtrap to be her dad, and is terrified of disobeying him. Meanwhile, you've got the Princess Quest machines connecting more to the vengeful spirit, and the only two candidates who would really make sense from there are Michael Afton
and there's also, I don't know if this matters because it's Ruin, but there is also a lot of baby plushies with a blue eye and green eye in like the FNAF Sid's burn location at the end of Ruin before you meet the Mimic.
And Henry Emily, who we know were present in the location. And from those two options, Michael has a lot more going for him. Michael was connected with a brown-haired boy in a striped shirt who was associated with a yellow bear and a bite. Glamrock Freddy is connected with a brown-haired boy in a striped shirt who, in the Princess Quest ending, is shown with a yellow bear popsicle with a bite taken out of it. The one purpose Michael claims after getting brought back to life in his own corpse is that he's going to find his father and presumably try to get rid of him, considering he's implied to be associated with and at least an accomplice in 2 instances of trying to get rid of William by sending him on fire, which implies he wouldn't be willing to have his spirit put to rest until the job was done. Meanwhile, we've got Burntrap in the basement in his burnt Spring Bonnie corpse man glory, and while there's debate over whether or not Burntrap is the Mimic wearing the Spring Bonnie suit and corpse, if it was still the Mimic, the fact that it would be wearing William's haunted body and animatronic parts and have purple eyes for the duration instead of its usual orange or white, I think that still implies that at the time, William, or his influence, was probably present to some degree. And if William was, or even seemed to still be around, I doubt that Michael would be content to move on himself until he could be sure that William was gone and couldn't hurt anyone else again. And that's not getting into
It's one of those things where it feels like a major cop-out, and maybe it kind of is, but it's when you think about, we play as Michael Afton every single game. FNAF 1, FNAF 2, FNAF 3, FNAF 4 even, FNAF 5's location, FNAF 6, Glamrock Freddy in Security Breach. Every single game, we either play as Michael Afton, or Michael Afton is a very key character in every single game in the series. And every single game, it has this constant theme of Michael Afton going location to location, not only burning it down, but also trying to find his father, trying to find answers because, he should be dead. Why is my skin literally purple? Why am I a rotting corpse? I should have been dead when I got tricked into the scooping room at this location. I should have been dead when Ennard put all these animatronic robotic parts in me and then vomited out into the sewer and everything. Like, I should be dead, but I'm not. Why am I not dead and everything? Why can I not die? So he's going location to location trying to find answers. And as we saw in Security Breach, there was 2 times where fire is involved. Whether it was the fire escape ending, where it was Freddy open up his index finger and burn the place down. Once again, connection to Michael Afton going location to location and burning every pizzeria down. But also the bird trap ending, which is what we see Michael Afton and his father, William Afton, around fire. So once again, it also paints that connection. Yo, shout out for the 20-month sub. That's insane.
Some of the other parallels that connect him back to Mike. Michael had an animatronic crawl inside of him to hide from people. Glamrock Freddy had a kid crawl inside of him to hide from animatronics. Michael is associated with the color purple and put his brother in the mouth of a Fredbear animatronic which had purple accessories. And Glamrock Freddy's bow tie turns purple as he's upgraded. The Princess Quest ending not only connects Gregory to the crying child through his bitten Fredbear popsicle, but the lighting makes it look like they're all wearing or shaded in the color purple, the color associated with Aftons. And the fact that Vanessa is holding an ice cream cone, which we know lured Elizabeth Afton into getting killed by Circus Baby, so with Gregory connected to the crying child and Vanessa to Elizabeth, that seems to imply a connection between Michael and Freddy by default. Similarly, there's a secret room in the Pizzaplex that's a modified version of Michael's room from Sister Location, where we can listen to recordings of both Vanessa and another character who the books imply to be Gregory's therapy sessions, and we can see a code on the wall that seems to be about Gregory based on part of the code translating to dodge, duck, flash, shoot, crawl, run, crush the vile band, which is exactly what he does during Security Breach. From there, wouldn't it make sense for the third focus of the room, namely the setup Mike used to watch TV during Sister Location, make sense to connect to the third member of the trio? Of course, Freddy being possessed by Mike wasn't the only common opinion during the time after Security Breach launched. There was, and still are, plenty of people who believe that Freddy is just an AI that happened to develop self-awareness while clearing out the FNAF 6 location. And that's what he meant by finding himself and now having the ability to choose, with his mention of not being himself referring to Glitch Trap taking over him. Technically speaking, I don't think it really makes much sense for Freddy to be referring to
I mean, why would he come into consciousness, right? Just because of AI? I feel like that's a little bit, even for a series like this, I feel like that's a little bit of a stretch of imagination where it's I need a little bit more than that. Because a line I constantly go back to in the beginning of Security Breach, if I'm not mistaken, it's after you complete the generator section, night section of the moon, terrifying section by the way, and then you're in the power chamber birthing pod with Freddy, and then you see Vanny skip over the room and everything, and Freddy jokingly talks about a water fountain. Amazing, by the way. Gregory questions oh, why don't you harm me and everything, Rotzi, Bonti, Chica, they tried to attack me, they tried to harm me, they tried to kill me, why don't you do it? And Freddy just simply doesn't have an answer. He just says I don't know, I just have the consciousness in me to protect you. It's you say that, it's I'm obviously going to have the interpretation that there's something more going on here. You don't just say, oh no, I just have this assumption, this interpretation, this mindset to protect you, while all these other animatronics are trying to kill you, you don't just say that out the blue random. Like, it has to mean something more. Or maybe that's just Mr. Hippo talking, where it's like, you try to find meaning in everything everyone says, and you just drive yourself crazy. Maybe that's also true. But once again, think about what series we're talking about here. This series started off with you counting Freddy buttons and Foxy toes. And we're talking about looking into too much detail. Thanks, Mr. Hippo.
Glitch Trap taking over, since immediately before that line he says he'll protect Gregory, which isn't very Glitch Trap-like of him, and he doesn't even start getting hijacked until Burn Traps slapped his hand down on the computer screen well after his speech is over. However, after Ruin and Secret of the Mimic focused much more heavily on the Mimic, and Help wanted to just bridge the gap between Security Breach and its DLC, a lot of fans have come up with other explanations for Freddy's behavior related to the Mimic. Some of them are in a similar vein to Freddy just being a sentient AI influenced by the Mimic program, but another interesting one that's come up since Secret of the Mimic is based on the introduction of F10 and 4, Fiona, the original Mimic program contained inside a machine that looks like the Mix's security system machine from the Ruin DLC. For those who'd like a refresher, since it has been a couple years since Ruin came out, the game focuses on Gregory's friend Cassie, who's lured to the Pizzaplex by the Mimic pretending to be Gregory. She's led to deactivating the security nodes around the building in the AR world, which she accesses through a Vanny mask that implanted a chip in her head that communicates with the occipital lobe of her brain, which controls perception. However, if she spends too much time in the AR world, a blue rabbit entity shows up and tries to stop Cassie by summoning the animatronics around the building and making it so she either can or can't take off her mask. Though of the animatronics, Roxy actually snaps out of her aggression when she realizes that it's Cassie and not the kid who stole her eyeballs. Eventually, Cassie gains access to the pizzeria simulator location under the building, where she finds a room with a destroyable concrete wall trapping the Mimic in the next room, and a machine labeled Mixes. When she deactivates it, we can see that the blue rabbit entity was tied to the Mixes machine, and with the concrete wall destroyed, the Mimic is let loose. Fortunately for Cassie, Roxy manages to stop the Mimic from attacking her, and the real Gregory gets in contact with her. Unfortunately, Roxy isn't able to hold the Mimic off forever, and Cassie ends up getting chased by the Mimic and dropped down an elevator shaft. Meanwhile, Secret of the Mimic shows us that the original Mimic, M1, ended up imitating and taking on the identity of its creator, Edwin's deceased wife, Fiona. However, after Edwin's son David died and he failed to recreate him the way M1 sort of recreated Fiona, he got upset and said he never wanted to see or hear M1 again, seemingly stuck her in a suspiciously Mixes-shaped F10N4, and copied her program to make M2, the Mimic we see in Ruin. With the strange overlapping text and intercom feedback in the elevator before Gregory shifts from trying to save Cassie to trying to get rid of her by dropping it, and how Gregory previously mentions a friend that has the building maps and how Cassie should follow Static's instructions, I suspect that since we know Gregory has also been in the Mixes room with his backpack being there, Mixes/M1 is the friend with the building maps.
Mixes is the friend. Okay. The entire time when we heard the friend, we assumed that to be Vanessa, the security guard.
And was actually the one to drop Cassie. The thing is, while Gregory could just consider M1 a friend because of the off-screen familiarity implied by the presence of his backpack in the Mixes room, another idea that I've seen suggested is that he considers M1 a friend because M1 was partially in control of Glamrock Freddy. We know that Mixes has connections to all the animatronics since it's linked to them through the security system in Ruin, and Freddy finding himself when he cleared the path in Pizzeria Simulator could be because he found Mixes, which was then able to exert extra influence over him to make him not himself. We know from Secret of the Mimic that M1 talks a bit formally, just like Freddy does. Additionally, Roxy was also connected to Mixes, with the connections going so far as her literally being a security node in the system that needed to be disabled, and her speech follows a similar, more formal pattern when she's snapped out of her glitch trap-fueled rage mode by Cassie. Additionally, with Fiona's persona at play, an M1 influenced Freddy would have plenty of reasons to protect Gregory. M1 lost the child she viewed as her son and wanted him back, and maybe she sees some of David in Gregory and feels protective over him. Not to mention, while Michael as Freddy would make sense as being a foil to William or a William persona as Burntrap, the amount of focus and relevance that the Mimic has gotten recently would make it make sense for M1 to be the foil for M2. Sure, there may be a lot of ways that Freddy parallels or connects to Michael Afton, but there isn't actually anything weird about him that can't just be explained by either M1's involvement or him just developing sentience at a coincidental time, right?
I will say the bizarre thing about this whole thing about M1 being the friend that Gregor was talking about is, if you think about the series as a whole, and you can say whatever you want about the story being convoluted and complicated, it is. I'm not ashamed to admit that. Hell, that's why I started doing these videos to begin with, is so I can keep up with the lore myself because it's complicated and can get very, very confused in a hurry. But also it's for people like you as well to follow along with me, and we all like go on this journey together, and we all stay up to date with what's going on in the series. But with what we got in the Secret of the Mimic, the whole story of FNAF, it seems like this constant trend is character versus William Afton or the Aftons. Michael Afton versus William Afton. Cassidy versus William Afton. Henry versus William Afton. Charlie Charlotte versus William Afton. At Secret of the Mimic, Edwin versus William Afton. Because remember, Edwin said, like, oh, don't trust William Afton. They're trying to, like, steal my business. Dad was right. Don't trust William Afton and everything. William Afton poaches all of Edwin's employees and steals them and works for Fazbear Entertainment. Right? M1 being tied to Fiona. If we believe M1 is tied to Fiona, and M3 is Glitchtrap, and M2 is the David incarnation, the villain mimic, who has homicidal tendencies, who Edwin beats because they are just filled with grief and they are reminded of their now dead child, right? And it's this whole custody battle of M1 trying to get M2 to be the way that they want, aka Fiona getting David to be her robot child. M3, on the other hand, Glitchtrap, Burntrap, William Afton, it wants the M2 homicidal tendency mimic villain to basically start this new wave, continue on his legacy and being a villain and everything, carry on his quest of this like Glitchtrap cult of killing people in the likeness of M2 now, right? This constant battle. M1 is tied to Fiona. And if M3 is tied to Glitchtrap, and Gregory being tied to the Aftons, why would M1 Fiona help out Gregory, who's tied to her nemesis pretty much? Right? And also, if you don't believe me, take this with a grain of salt, but a constant theory going around since Security Breach came out is Gregory is actually more of a villain than we saw in the games and everything. The books paint him out to be this homicidal tendency villain maniac. So much so, I want to say he has like the alternate persona of like Dr. Rabbit, and he is the one that like lured Cassie into the Pizza Plets so then she can get taken over by the Mimic Network and be the new Vanny. So Gregory's a villain.
Well, actually, no. One symptom of hauntings is that haunted machines sometimes won't turn off, even when they don't have a source of power. For example, in the Fazbear Frights books, the Stitch Wraith's battery pack gets shot and limits its energy, but the fact that it was still possessed made it able to function as long as it needed to. Additionally, in the new Ticket to Fun activity kit, there's a note to Freddy's employees about how some of the arcade games would randomly turn on at night and stay on, even if unplugged, with strange messages displayed on the screens. Meanwhile, we know from Fazbear Frights that Remnant is not only material that binds spirits and non-physical elements to the physical world, but it's also a source of power, which would explain this phenomenon. And wouldn't you know it, we actually see this at play with Freddy. While he's kept on reduced power during the game and can't be active for more than an hour without having to recharge, there's one portion of the game where he manages to last twice as long as he's supposed to without recharging. Something that, if he was a normal animatronic, shouldn't be possible, especially since we see him collapse from a lack of power in one of the endings. However, his quote-unquote second wind would make a lot of sense if, due to the powerful urge he had to rescue Gregory during that time, he was able to use the power of Remnant resulting from being haunted to function longer than he was supposed to. Throw in the Michael connections and how the idea of Michael getting his little brother killed only to end up saving the life of a boy who looks a lot like him is very satisfying from a narrative perspective, and even though Freddy isn't relevant enough in post-main game Security Breach to get more information on what's up with him, I definitely say that the evidence as it currently stands points the strongest to Mike possessing Freddy. While I understand the concern that being haunted takes away from Freddy himself as a character, I think it's important to remember that when it comes to haunted animatronics, the AI of the animatronic is often just as important as the spirit possessing it. Circus Baby is an excellent example in both the games and the original novel trilogy, where she's influenced by both her programming Circus Baby's memories as well as those of Elizabeth. It's even probably the case for the main animatronics as well, since they typically act in accordance with the animatronic programming they have, but are also influenced by their spirits. Glamrock Freddy canonically has a personality chip that dictates his behavior, so everything we see Freddy do in-game is still based on Glamrock Freddy's actual character and personality. It's just also not him at the same time, as Michael would be considered just as much part of him as that programming would be. Not only that, but if we refer back to the Scott Cawthon interview, one thing that he very specifically said is that because he has an inclination to lean sci-fi, he especially likes things involving possession of AI or possession of machines and circuitry. Not that he just likes AI or just advanced machines, but specifically the possession of it. In the interview itself, he says this in reference to how he loves the idea of glitch trap, which is a whole can of worms for the mimic trap debate, but I think it could apply equally well to Glamrock Freddy. If Scott's inclination is towards the possession of AI, why wouldn't the signs of Freddy being possessed point to him actually being possessed? Why wouldn't spirits still be possessing animatronics, arcade cabinets, and computer programs? The supernatural and technological are both core aspects of the series, and while the technological side is much more front and center in regards to the mimic, that doesn't mean there can't also be supernatural things going on as well. We see that the player in Help Wanted 2 seems to possess the bot that gives Cassie her Vanny mask, we know there's a white tiger apparition haunting the building in Secret of the Mimic, and we know that Freddy found himself in the pizzeria simulator location, recognized Burntrap as a him while Gregory acted like that was weird and called Burntrap that thing, and was able to get a second wind to help him power through a time when he should have powered off. I don't think Five Nights at Freddy's is done with the supernatural in this current arc of games, and while I of course can't say for sure that Michael specifically is Freddy, I definitely think that it's still just as likely now as it was when Security Breach came out. And hey, if you really want to give Freddy more...
Alright, so let me know on the theory, what do you think about all that? I would say I remember at one point, it was widely believed, a common theory out there was that Henry was Glamrock Freddy, because once again, this whole battle of William Afton trapped down the pizzeria, trapped down the basement. Well, here's Henry, the former business partner, going to another location, just like FNAF sits, and trying to burn it all down, and trying to burn his former business partner down, trying to banish him to the darkest, deep pit of hell, as he says in that iconic FNAF sit speech. Is this just another example of that? So no, that was a popular theory out there. But let me know your thoughts on it. What do you think? Do you think Michael Afton is tied to Glamrock Freddy? And do you think this whole supernatural sci-fi angle is interesting? I'm obviously very curious, because I brought this up before, but I'm always curious to know like what people think about it. Because obviously when FNAF first came out in like 2014, this whole like sci-fi possession, glitching viruses, VR, AR networks, possession of like circuit boards, like glitch trap, none of that existed. In the FNAF 1, FNAF 2, FNAF 3 days, it was about ghost kids lured to a back room and killed by a serial killer and never to be found again. That was the biggest mystery and lore and Easter eggs. And way back then, how we got answers, how we figured out the lore, how we figured out what was going on in the series, is we looked in the source code, we read the newspaper clippings, we took stuff like audio tapes from the phone calls from the nights of FNAF 1, 2, and 3. We're now doing, that was what we did back in the day. But nowadays, we're looking at VR, AR, network, glitch and viruses, Princess Quest minigames, and who is tied to what possession of an animatronic and what circuit board. We're doing the same stuff, but it's now way more sci-fi and way more advanced. The series has evolved, which honestly, I'm not opposed to. I like it, because I think things are supposed to evolve and progress over time. And FNAF is a great example of that, because it keeps people like me hooked and interested to see what the story is all about. So you can say whatever you want about the story being inconsistent or having no focus, but hey, to me, it's better than running the same mystery of kids loot to a back room and how does these businesses keep getting open when they have the same issue of kids getting killed. To me, it makes it more interesting. But I don't know. Maybe I'm just biased. So let me know.